The dust painted amber streaks across the vast Wyoming sky as Vivian Keller stared at the endless horizon, her eyes burning from the strain of constant vigilance. 3 weeks had passed since her husband's death, and the ranch was slipping through her fingers like the fine prairie soil during a drought. At 24, she had never imagined she would be standing on the porch of a failing cattle ranch with creditors circling like vultures and winter approaching with merciless certainty. It was 1878, and the promise of the frontier had turned bitter in her mouth. The cattle market had collapsed, leaving Thomas's debts unpaid and Vivian with nothing but a parcel of land too large to manage alone and too precious to abandon. Her husband had died believing help would come from his old partner in Colorado. That was the cruelest joke of all, pinning their hopes on a man who might never arrive. "You're watching for ghosts again," said Alina, the housekeeper who'd stayed when the other hands had left. The older woman's weathered face creased with concern as she handed Vivian a cup of coffee. "The dead don't come riding back, child. I'm not looking for Thomas," Vivian said, accepting the cup. "I'm looking for a miracle," Alina sighed. "Miracles are in short supply out here. Better to think about selling before winter. You could get a fair price if you act now." Vivian's fingers tightened around the warm cup. "This land is all I have left. Thomas died believing we could make it work." "Thomas is gone," Alina said, her voice gentle but firm, "and you need to consider what's best for you now." Vivian took a sip of the bitter coffee and let the warmth seep into her bones. The September air carried the first hint of autumn's bite. She had perhaps 6 weeks before the first snow, and the barn roof still needed repair. The cattle had to be moved to the southern pasture. The well was failing. And she had exactly $23 to her name. "The Blackstone Bank man will be back tomorrow," Alina reminded her. "You need to have an answer for him." Vivian nodded. Mr. Higgins from Blackstone Bank had been polite but unmovable on his last visit. The note on the ranch was due, and no amount of pleading had softened his resolve. She needed $500 by the end of the month, or she would lose everything. "I'll think of something," Vivian said, though her mind was as empty of solutions as her pantry was of food. Alina patted her shoulder and returned inside, leaving Vivian alone with the setting sun and her desperation. As darkness crept across the land, she refused to go inside. Instead, she lit the lantern that hung by the door and kept her vigil. "Please," she whispered to whatever God might be listening to a desperate woman's prayer. "Send me what I need." The night deepened, stars pricking through the darkness like pinpricks in black velvet. Vivian dozed in the chair, her dreams troubled by the sound of hoofbeats that existed only in her mind. Until they didn't. She jolted awake at the distant rhythm of a horse approaching. Disoriented, she grabbed the lantern and held it high, peering into the darkness. A lone rider emerged from the shadows, silhouetted against the night sky. Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs. She reached for the shotgun that leaned against the porch rail, cocking it with trembling hands. Lone riders after dark seldom brought good news. That's far enough. She called when the horse was within earshot. "State your business or turn around." The rider pulled his mount to a stop. "Looking for the Keller place," a deep voice replied. "Would that be here?" "Depends who's asking," Vivian answered, keeping the shotgun steady. The man dismounted slowly, hands visible. "Name's Wade Yates. Thomas Keller was my partner years back. Got word he needed help." Vivian nearly dropped the gun. "You're too late," she said, her voice cracking. "Thomas died 3 weeks ago." The silence that followed seemed to stretch across the plains themselves. Then the man took a step forward, and the lantern light caught his face. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with features carved by sun and wind. His clothes were trail-worn and exhaustion lined his face, but his eyes were clear and steady as they met hers. "I'm sorry to hear that, madam," he said, removing his hat. "Thomas was a good man." "Yes, he was," Vivian agreed, lowering the shotgun slightly. "How did you know him?" "We ran cattle together in Colorado before he came north." Got his letter about a month back saying things were tough, said he needed a hand. Wade Yates shifted his weight. If I'm intruding on your grief, I can move on come morning. Vivian hesitated. This man was a stranger, and she had only his word that he knew Thomas. But something in his direct gaze reminded her of her late husband, an honesty that couldn't be feigned, and she was desperate. "There's a barn," she said finally. "You can put your horse there and sleep in the bunkhouse." "In the morning we'll talk," he nodded, gathering his reins. "Much obliged, Mrs. Keller." "Vivian," she corrected him. "If you knew my husband, you can use my name." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or approval. "Vivian, then, and I'm Wade." She watched him lead his horse toward the barn, a tall figure moving confidently through the darkness. When he disappeared inside, she exhaled slowly, realizing she'd been holding her breath. Alina appeared in the doorway behind her. "Who is that man?" "Says he's Thomas's old partner from Colorado," Vivian replied, her eyes still on the barn. "Wade Yates." "And you're letting him stay, just like that?" Vivian turned to face the older woman. "What choice do I have, Alina? If he's telling the truth, maybe he can help us, and if he's lying..." She glanced at the shotgun in her hands. "I'm not helpless," Alina frowned. "Just be careful. Men like that drifters, they've got nothing to lose." "And I've got everything to lose," Vivian countered. "Which makes us an interesting pair, doesn't it?" After checking the doors were locked, Vivian climbed the stairs to her bedroom. Sleep eluded her as she lay staring at the ceiling, wondering if the stranger in her barn was the answer to her prayers or just another complication in a life already unraveling. Morning arrived with the harsh clarity that only the plains could deliver. Vivian dressed quickly in her work clothes, a plain skirt and blouse that had seen better days, and twisted her auburn hair into a practical knot. She splashed water on her face from the basin, studying her reflection in the small mirror. Grief had hollowed her cheeks and darkened the skin beneath her green eyes, but determination still burned in her gaze. When she entered the kitchen, Alina was already cooking, and to her surprise, Wade Yates sat at the table, a cup of coffee in his hands. In the daylight, she could see him clearly, broad-shouldered but lean, with brown hair that curled at the collar of his faded blue shirt. A scar ran along his jaw, white against tanned skin. He stood when she entered, an old-fashioned courtesy that caught her off guard. "Morning," he said, nodding respectfully. "Mr. Yates," she acknowledged, accepting the coffee Alina handed her. "I hope you slept well." "Well enough," he replied. "Your foreman mentioned there's trouble with the north fence line. Thought I might take a look after breakfast if you're agreeable." Vivian exchanged a quick glance with Alina. "We don't have a foreman anymore, just Alina and me." Wade's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I see. The hands left after Thomas died," Vivian explained, sitting down across from him. "The ranch hasn't been paying its way." "Which is why Thomas wrote to me," Wade said, nodding slowly. "He said the drought had hit hard and the cattle prices were down." "That's part of it," Vivian agreed. "But there's more." She hesitated, unused to discussing her affairs with strangers. But if this man was to help, he needed to know the truth. "We're in debt. The bank is threatening foreclosure if I can't make payment by month's end." Wade leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "How much?" $500, he whistled softly. "That's a considerable sum." "It's impossible," Vivian admitted. "Unless I sell the ranch itself, which defeats the purpose of saving it. And the cattle, 40 head left, not enough to cover the debt, especially at current prices." Wade took a sip of his coffee, his expression thoughtful. "I may have a solution, Mrs. Keller, but it's not without risk." "I'm listening." "There's a cattle buyer in Cheyenne named Prescott. He's looking for stock to ship east before winter, pays fair prices, better than you'll get locally." "Cheyenne's 4 days' ride," Vivian pointed out, "and I can't move the cattle alone." "You wouldn't be alone," Wade said simply. "I'd help you." Alina placed plates of eggs and bacon before them. "A woman alone with a stranger on the trail, that's not proper, Mr. Yates." Wade inclined his head respectfully to the older woman. "You're right, madam. Which is why you should come too." The three of us could manage 40 head to Cheyenne. Vivian stared at him. You're suggesting we drive the cattle ourselves? That's mad. It's necessary, Wade countered. You need the money and those cattle are your only asset. Prescott will give you enough to pay the bank and have something left over to get through winter. Why would you do this? Vivian asked, suspicion edging her voice. You just arrived. You don't owe us anything. Wade met her gaze directly. I owed Thomas. He saved my life once. I couldn't get here in time to help him, but I can help his wife. The simple statement hung in the air between them. Vivian studied him, looking for deception and finding none. I'll need to know how you met my husband, she said finally. And what happened between you? Wade nodded. Fair enough. After breakfast, I'll check that fence while you consider my offer. Then I'll tell you everything you want to know. True to his word, Wade headed out to the north pasture after eating, borrowing one of the work horses from the barn. Vivian watched him ride out, his posture easy in the saddle, confident without arrogance. What do you think, Alina? She asked as they washed the breakfast dishes, the older woman's hands stilled in the soapy water. I think he's capable, and I think we're desperate. Do you believe his story about knowing Thomas? Alina dried her hands on her apron. He knew where to find the ranch, and he has Thomas's way of looking you straight in the eye when he's speaking. But that doesn't mean we should trust him with our lives on a cattle drive. Vivian gazed out the window at the endless expanse of Wyoming territory. If we stay, we lose everything anyway. At least his plan offers a chance. It's your decision, Alina said gently. But if we go, we should leave tomorrow. The weather won't hold forever. Wade returned at midday, his shirt soaked with sweat from repairing the fence. Vivian met him at the pump where he was washing trail dust from his face. The fence is fixed, he reported, pushing wet hair back from his forehead. You've got a good piece of land here despite everything. Rich grass in the lower meadow. It's the water that's the problem, Vivian said. The well's failing and the creek runs dry by August. Wade nodded, understanding the challenge. That can be addressed given time and resources. He dried his hands on a rag. Have you thought about my proposal? I have, Vivian said, but first I want to hear about you and Thomas. Wade leaned against the pump, his expression turning distant. We met in '71, both working a ranch outside Denver. I was young, hot-headed. Got into a fight with some men in town, wrong men, as it turned out. They followed me back to the ranch, looking to finish what we started. He traced the scar on his jaw absently. Thomas stepped in when they cornered me, took a beating for his trouble, but he stood his ground, said I was under his protection. That sounds like Thomas, Vivian said softly. Wade nodded. After that, we became partners, bought cattle together, drove them to market, did well for a few years until the market shifted. Thomas met you, wanted to settle down. We split amicably, he took his share and came north. I kept working the trail. And now, Vivian asked. What brings you here, really? A letter from a man you haven't seen in years. Wade's gaze was steady. Thomas was more than a partner. He was the closest thing to family I had. When someone like that asks for help, you come. The simplicity of his answer rang true. Vivian made her decision. We'll leave tomorrow, she said. But understand this, Mr. Yates, I'm not some helpless widow. This is my ranch, my cattle, and my life. I expect to be treated as an equal partner in this venture. A slow smile spread across Wade's face, the first she'd seen. It transformed him, softening the hard edges of his features. I wouldn't have it any other way, Mrs. Keller. Vivian, she reminded him. Vivian, he echoed, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition of mutual respect that felt like the foundation of something more. The remainder of the day passed in a flurry of preparations. Wade worked tirelessly, checking the cattle, repairing the wagon that would carry their supplies, and preparing the horses they would ride. Vivian was impressed by his efficiency and knowledge. He clearly knew ranching and cattle. By nightfall, everything was ready. They would take all 40 head, leaving only the milk cow behind with a neighbor who had agreed to check on the ranch in their absence. The wagon was loaded with provisions, bedrolls, and the few personal items Alina insisted on bringing. Dawn would see them on the trail to Cheyenne. Vivian stood on the porch that night, much as she had the night before, but with a different feeling in her heart. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt a flicker of hope. "Penny for your thoughts," came Wade's voice from the shadows. He joined her at the railing, respecting her space but close enough that she could feel his presence. "I was thinking about tomorrow," Vivian admitted. "About whether I'm making the right choice." Having second thoughts, she shook her head. "Not exactly, just acknowledging the risk. This ranch is all I have if something goes wrong." "I understand," Wade said quietly, "but sometimes standing still is riskier than moving forward." Vivian turned to look at him. "Is that why you keep to the trail, always moving forward?" Something guarded flickered across his face. "Partly. And partly because I've never found a reason compelling enough to stop." The honesty in his admission touched her. "Well, Mr. Yates, I hope this journey gives us both what we need." His eyes, silvered in the moonlight, held hers. "As do I, Mrs. Keller, as do I." They set out before dawn, the cattle lowing softly as they were urged from their familiar pasture. Wade rode point, Vivian took one flank, and Alina followed in the wagon, occasionally helping to keep stragglers in line. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. As the sun rose fully, painting the eastern sky in streaks of crimson and gold, Vivian felt a strange sense of freedom. For months, she had been trapped by grief and fear, anchored to a failing ranch and a future she couldn't control. Now, moving across the open prairie with purpose, she felt alive again. Wade led them along a route that followed creek beds, ensuring water for the cattle. He set an unhurried pace, careful not to tire the animals unnecessarily. By midday, they had covered a respectable distance, and he called a halt in a sheltered draw where water and grass were plentiful. "We'll rest through the worst of the heat," he announced, dismounting gracefully. "No sense pushing them when the sun's high." Vivian slid from her saddle, muscles protesting after hours of riding. "How far have we come?" "About 10 miles, Wade estimated. "Not bad for the first morning. We'll make another 5 or 6 before dark." Alina climbed stiffly from the wagon. "I'll get some food together," she said, reaching for the provisions box. "Let me help," Wade offered, taking the heavy container from her. Vivian watched their easy cooperation as they set up a small camp. Despite his rough appearance, Wade moved with a natural courtesy that put both women at ease. He built a small fire, helped Alina prepare a simple meal of beans and biscuits, and tended to the horses before accepting a plate for himself. As they ate, seated on the ground around the fire, Vivian studied him openly. "You've done this before," she observed. "Cattle drives." Wade nodded, wiping his plate clean with a biscuit. "Many times, mostly larger herds, more men. But the principles are the same: keep them watered, keep them moving, and don't rush." "And you think this buyer in Cheyenne will take all 40 head?" Vivian pressed. "At a fair price." "Prescott's a businessman, but an honest one," Wade assured her. "I've dealt with him before. He'll pay market rate, maybe a bit more if the cattle are in good condition." "And these are," Alina interjected. "Thomas was always particular about his stock." A shadow crossed Wade's face at the mention of his former partner. "Yes, he was. He had an eye for good cattle." "How long had it been since you'd seen him?" Vivian asked, curious about this man who had known her husband in ways she never had. Wade set his empty plate aside. 5 years. We exchanged letters occasionally. He wrote when you were married." A small smile touched his lips. "Said he'd found something worth settling down for." The words brought a flush to Vivian's cheeks. "He never told me much about his life before Wyoming." "Thomas wasn't one to dwell on the past," Wade said. "He was always looking forward to the next opportunity, the next horizon." "That's true," Vivian agreed softly. "Even at the end, when things were desperate, he believed we'd find a way through." The conversation lulled, each lost in their own thoughts. Alina broke the silence. "We should rest if we're to continue today." They doused the fire and settled in the shade of the wagon. Wade moved a short distance away, respecting the women's privacy as they made themselves comfortable on bedrolls spread in the wagon bed. The afternoon heat shimmered across the landscape, distorting the distant hills. Vivian tried to sleep but found herself watching Wade instead. He sat with his back against a rock, hat pulled low over his eyes, seemingly relaxed but alert. There was something reassuring about his presence, a quiet competence that inspired confidence. She must have dozed eventually because the next thing she knew, Wade was gently shaking her shoulder. "Time to move," he said, stepping back as soon as she opened her eyes. "Weather's changing. We should make a few more miles before it breaks." Vivian sat up, noticing the darkening clouds gathering in the west. "Storm coming," Wade nodded. "Not for a few hours yet, but we'll need to find better shelter than this draw. There's a stand of cottonwoods about 5 miles ahead. We'll aim for that." They resumed their journey, the cattle more cooperative after their rest. The wind picked up as the afternoon wore on, carrying the scent of rain. Vivian rode beside Wade now, both of them keeping the herd moving at a steady pace. "Will the storm cause problems?" she asked, watching the clouds build. "Depends on its severity," Wade replied. "Cattle don't mind a gentle rain, but thunder makes them nervous. Lightning can cause a stampede if they're spooked." "What do we do if that happens?" His glance was approving. "Stay calm, stay mounted if possible, and try to turn the leaders. Get them moving in a circle instead of a straight line." Vivian absorbed this information, adding it to the growing store of knowledge she was accumulating. "You're a good teacher," she observed. "You're a good student," he countered. "Most people ask fewer questions and make more mistakes." She smiled at that. "I can't afford mistakes right now." "None of us can," he agreed soberly. They reached the cottonwood grove just as the first large drops of rain began to fall. It was a small oasis in the prairie, a cluster of tall trees surrounding a spring-fed pond. Wade directed them to a natural clearing where the trees would provide some shelter. "We'll set up here," he announced, helping a leaner down from the wagon. "The cattle can water at the pond and graze nearby. The trees will break the worst of the wind." With practiced efficiency, he strung a tarp between the wagon and a tree, creating a sheltered area just as the rain began in earnest. A leaner quickly moved their supplies under cover, while Vivian helped Wade secure the horses. They worked side by side, the rain plastering their clothes to their bodies. Wade removed his coat and draped it over Vivian's shoulders despite her protests. "You'll catch your death," she objected. "I've been wet before," he said simply. "Won't be the last time." By the time they joined a leaner under the tarp, they were both soaked to the skin. The older woman clucked disapprovingly, handing them both dry blankets from the wagon supplies. "You'll need to change," she told Vivian. "I'll keep Mr. Yates occupied while you do." Wade turned his back immediately, moving to the edge of their shelter to watch the cattle. Vivian changed quickly, grateful for the dry clothes even if they were rapidly becoming damp in the humid air. "Your turn," she called to Wade when she was decent. He changed his shirt but declined to remove his wet pants. "They'll dry eventually," he said with a shrug when a leaner scolded him. As night fell, the storm intensified. Rain hammered the tarp, and lightning split the sky in jagged bursts of brilliance. The cattle grew restless, moving nervously at the edge of the trees. "Should we do something?" Vivian asked, watching them with concern. Wade shook his head. "They'll settle once they get used to the noise. The trees will keep them from scattering too far." They ate a cold supper, the rain making a fire impossible. As darkness deepened, the three of them sat huddled under the tarp, listening to the storm's fury. A leaner dozed off first, wrapped in blankets in the wagon bed. "You should rest too," Wade told Vivian. "I'll keep watch." "You need sleep as much as I do," she pointed out. "I'm used to trail watches," he said. "Been doing this a long time." Vivian studied his profile, illuminated briefly by lightning. "How long have you been on your own, Wade?" The personal question seemed to surprise him. He was silent so long she thought he might not answer. "Since I was 16, he finally said. "My father died in the war. Mother remarried a man who had no use for another man's son. I left the day I was big enough to find work. That must have been difficult, Vivian said softly. Wade shrugged. It taught me self-reliance. Can't say I regretted leaving. And no family of your own. The question slipped out before she could reconsider it. His smile was fleeting. Hard to have a family when you're always moving, and most women aren't looking for a man with dusty boots and empty pockets. The honesty in his answer touched her. Thomas said something similar when we met. He thought I deserved better than a cattleman with big dreams and little to show for them. And yet you married him, Wade observed. I did, Vivian confirmed. Because I saw beyond the dusty boots to the man wearing them. Their eyes met in the darkness, something unspoken passing between them. Then lightning flashed again, and the moment broke as thunder crashed directly overhead. The cattle, already nervous, reacted instantly. Vivian heard their frightened lowing turn to panic, followed by the unmistakable sound of hooves pounding earth. Wade was on his feet in an instant. "They're breaking," he shouted, grabbing his hat. "Stay here." But Vivian was already following him into the rain. "I'm coming with you." He didn't waste time arguing. They ran to the horses, mounted bareback with only halters for control, and rode into the darkness after the fleeing cattle. The rain blinded Vivian, but she could hear the cattle ahead, their panic a tangible force in the night. Wade rode beside her, then pulled ahead, his form barely visible in the intermittent lightning. "Circle right," he shouted over the storm. "Try to get ahead of them," Vivian urged her horse forward, riding parallel to the stampeding cattle. The ground was treacherous, slick with mud that threatened to bring her mount down with each stride. But the horse was sure-footed, and Vivian was a skilled rider despite her lack of cattle experience. She saw Wade's plan. He was attempting to reach the leaders, to turn them before they scattered completely. Vivian angled her horse to the right, gaining ground on the flank of the herd. If she could get ahead of them, she might help turn them back. Lightning struck a tree nearby, the crack of splitting wood like a rifle shot. Her horse reared, nearly unseating her. Vivian clung to its mane, fighting for balance as the animal came down on all fours and bolted forward in terror. For several terrifying moments, she was simply a passenger, unable to control the frightened horse. Then muscle memory took over, and she began to work with the animal's fear instead of fighting it, directing its momentum toward the cattle. Ahead, she could see Wade. He had reached the leaders and was attempting to turn them, his horse dancing at the edge of the stampede. The cattle were beginning to respond, their headlong flight curving gradually into a wide arc. Vivian reached the rear of the herd, adding her presence to Wade's efforts. Between them, they managed to turn the cattle completely, transforming their linear panic into a circular motion that gradually slowed as the animals tired. By the time the storm began to abate, the cattle were milling in a relatively small area. Their panic subsided. Vivian was soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face, her clothes clinging to her body like a second skin. But exhilaration coursed through her veins. They had done it, had prevented the complete loss of their herd. Wade rode up beside her, water streaming from his hat brim. "You're one hell of a rider," he said, admiration clear in his voice despite his obvious exhaustion. "I had a good teacher tonight," Vivian returned, breathless but proud. His laugh was unexpected, a rich, warm sound that seemed to cut through the diminishing rain. "I gave you one instruction. You figured out the rest yourself." They herded the cattle back toward the cottonwood grove, counting as they went. Remarkably, all 40 were accounted for, though several showed minor injuries from their panicked flight. Eleanor was waiting anxiously, a lantern held high as they approached the camp. "Thank the Lord," she exclaimed when she saw them. "I thought you'd both been killed." "Takes more than a storm to kill us," Wade said easily, helping Vivian dismount. His hands lingered briefly at her waist, steady and warm despite the chill of the rain. They tended the horses first, rubbing them down and checking for injuries. Then, finally, they sought the shelter of the tarp. Eleanor had managed to start a small fire in their absence, using the wagon's protection to keep it burning despite the rain. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," she told them both, her tone brooking no argument. "I'll make coffee." This time, Wade did change completely, withdrawing to the far side of the wagon while Vivian changed beside the fire. By the time he returned, she was wrapped in a blanket, her wet hair loose around her shoulders as she held her hands out to the flames. Wade accepted a cup of coffee from a leaner, his eyes lingering on Vivian. "You did well tonight," he said quietly. "Most experienced hands would have stayed in camp during a storm like that. I couldn't let you face it alone," Vivian replied simply. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a recognition. "No," he said softly. "You couldn't, could you?" Eleanor looked between them, her expression knowing. "I'm turning in," she announced. "Dawn will come early, storm or no storm." Left alone by the fire, Vivian and Wade sat in companionable silence, the shared experience of the night creating a bond between them that needed no words. "Why did you really come when Thomas wrote?" Vivian finally asked. "The truth this time." Wade stared into the fire, his profile sharp in the flickering light. "I told you the truth before. Thomas was family to me. But there's more," Vivian pressed gently. "I can see it in your face when you speak of him." Wade was silent for a long moment, then he sighed. "Thomas saved me in more ways than one. I was on a bad path before I met him, drinking too much, fighting, taking risks I shouldn't have. He showed me another way to be, taught me that a man is measured by more than his fists or his gun." "He had that effect on people," Vivian said softly. "It's what made me love him," Wade nodded. "When his letter came, I was in a dark place again, drifting with no purpose. His call for help gave me direction, something meaningful to do, and now," Vivian asked, "after we reached Cheyenne, what then?" Their eyes met across the fire. "I haven't thought that far ahead," Wade admitted. "One day at a time has been my way for a long time now." Vivian pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Well, Mr. Yates, I'm grateful for your one day at a time approach. We wouldn't have a herd left without you." "We," he echoed, a slight smile touching his lips. "It's been a while since I was part of a we." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Vivian felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire, a connection to this man that defied the short time they'd known each other. "We should rest," she said finally. "As a leaner said, dawn will come early," Wade nodded, banking the fire for the night. "Sleep well, Vivian." As she settled into her bedroll, Vivian was acutely aware of Wade's presence nearby. He had positioned himself at the edge of their shelter, both to give the women privacy and to keep watch over the cattle. His silhouette was the last thing she saw before closing her eyes, a steadfast guardian against the darkness. Morning broke clear and crisp, the storm having swept the air clean. Vivian woke to the smell of coffee and bacon and the sound of Wade's voice as he spoke quietly with a leaner. For a moment she lay still, listening to their easy conversation, surprised by how natural it seemed. "The creek's up after the rain," Wade was saying. "We'll need to find a safe crossing." "There's a ford about 3 miles south," Alina replied. "Thomas and I used it when we first came to the territory." "Good, we'll head there after breakfast." Vivian sat up, pushing hair from her face. Wade glanced over, a smile warming his eyes. "Morning," he said. "How are you feeling after last night's adventure?" "Sore," Vivian admitted, accepting the coffee Alina handed her. "But ready to move on." "That's the spirit," Wade approved. "We lost some time with the storm, but the cattle are rested and the trail will be easier today." They broke camp efficiently, falling into a routine that suggested they'd been working together far longer than 2 days. By mid-morning, they had reached the ford Alina remembered, and Wade led the cattle across the swollen creek with minimal difficulty. The day passed without incident, the cattle docile after their exertion the previous night. They covered good ground, the landscape gradually changing as they moved east. The vast, open prairie gave way to more varied terrain, rolling hills, dotted with stands of pine and aspen that blazed gold in the autumn sunlight. Wade rode beside Vivian for much of the day, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of previous cattle drives. She found herself laughing at his dry humor and appreciating his vast knowledge of the territory. "How did you learn so much about this country?" she asked, as they paused to let the cattle drink at a small stream. Wade dismounted, stretching his legs. "Trial and error, mostly. And listening to older hands who'd been here before the war. No formal education." Vivian was curious about this man who seemed to contain endless contradictions. "Some schooling back in Missouri," Wade said, bending to fill his canteen. "Enough to read, write, and figure. The rest I learned on the trail." Vivian joined him at the stream's edge, splashing cool water on her face. "It's a different kind of education, I suppose. No less valuable for being practical rather than theoretical," Wade observed, watching her. "What about you?" "You don't strike me as someone who was born to ranch life." Vivian smiled, surprised by his perception. "I grew up in Chicago. My father was a merchant. I was educated at a ladies' seminary until I was 18. And then my father died, leaving considerable debts," Vivian said matter-of-factly. "My mother and I moved to Denver to live with her sister. That's where I met Thomas." Wade nodded slowly. "So the frontier was as new to you as it was to him." "Completely foreign," Vivian confirmed. "But I adapted. Had to, really. There's no place for fragility out here." "No," Wade agreed, his eyes warm with approval. "There certainly isn't." They continued their journey, making camp that night in a sheltered valley. The routine was becoming familiar, securing the cattle, setting up the minimal camp, preparing a simple meal. Vivian found comfort in the repetition, in knowing her role and executing it efficiently. After supper, Alina retired early, leaving Vivian and Wade by the fire again. This time, the silence between them was comfortable, each content with their own thoughts yet aware of the other's presence. "Tell me about Chicago," Wade said eventually. "I've never been to a city that size." Vivian smiled, memories washing over her. "It's alive in a way that's hard to describe. People everywhere, buildings that touch the sky, noise at all hours. After the Great Fire, they rebuilt it stronger than before." "You miss it?" Wade asked, studying her face in the firelight. Vivian considered the question seriously. "I miss certain things: the libraries, the theaters, the sense of possibility that comes with so many people in one place. But I've come to love the openness of this country, the honesty of it." "The honesty," Wade repeated thoughtfully. "That's a good way to put it. The land doesn't lie about what it is or what it demands from you." "Exactly," Vivian said, pleased that he understood. "In the city, everything is constructed, artificial. Out here, there's a truth that can't be avoided." Wade added a log to the fire, sparks spiraling upward into the darkening sky. "And what truth are you facing, Vivian Keller?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. She looked at him, at the genuine interest in his eyes, and found herself answering with equal honesty. "That I'm alone now, that everything I thought my life would be has changed, that I have to find a new path forward." Wade nodded slowly. "Those are hard truths, but necessary ones," Vivian added. "What about you? What truths are you facing, Wade Yates?" He smiled faintly. "That I'm tired of drifting, that maybe it's time to find something worth stopping for." Their eyes met across the fire, and something electric passed between them, a recognition, a possibility, a question neither was ready to ask. The moment was broken by a distant howl, a wolf calling to its pack. Wade's expression shifted, becoming alert. "We should turn in," he said, rising to his feet. "I'll take first watch." Vivian nodded, understanding the practicalities even as she felt a twinge of regret at the conversation's end. "Wake me for the second watch," she insisted. "You need rest too." Wade's smile returned. "As the lady wishes." Vivian settled into her bedroll, but sleep eluded her. Her mind kept returning to Wade's words, something worth stopping for, and the way he had looked at her when he said them. It was too soon for such thoughts, she told herself firmly. Thomas had been gone barely a month. And yet, And yet, she couldn't deny the connection forming between them, forged in shared purpose and mutual respect. There was something about Wade Yates that called to her his quiet competence, his unexpected gentleness, the hint of vulnerability beneath his capable exterior. She was still awake when he came to wake her for her watch, his touch light on her shoulder. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly, noticing her open eyes. "Too much thinking," Vivian admitted, sitting up. Wade settled beside her, his back against a saddle. "Want company for your watch? I'm not finding sleep either." She nodded, grateful for his presence. They sat side by side, watching the cattle and the star-filled sky. Eventually, Vivian's head drooped against Wade's shoulder, exhaustion finally claiming her. He remained perfectly still, allowing her to rest, his own vigilance never wavering. When dawn came, Alina found them, thus Vivian asleep against Wade's shoulder, his arm lightly around her to prevent her falling, his eyes still scanning the horizon for potential threats. The older woman raised an eyebrow but said nothing, simply began preparing breakfast as though finding her employer in such a position was entirely unremarkable. Vivian woke to the smell of coffee, momentarily disoriented until she realized where she was and who she was leaning against. She straightened quickly, cheeks flushing. "I'm sorry," she began. "I didn't mean to." "No need for apologies," Wade said easily, standing and offering her a hand up. "You were tired, and I didn't mind." The simple statement, delivered without artifice, diffused her embarrassment. She accepted his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. Their eyes met briefly, and Vivian saw nothing but respect in his gaze. "Thank you," she said softly, "for keeping watch." His smile warmed her more than the morning sun. "Always." The day stretched before them, the third of their journey. According to Wade, they would reach Cheyenne late the following day if all went well. Vivian found herself both anticipating and dreading their arrival, eager for the financial security it would bring, yet reluctant for this unexpected interlude to end. As they rode that day, the cattle moving steadily eastward, Vivian noticed a change in the landscape. The rolling hills were giving way to more rugged terrain with rocky outcroppings and deeper ravines. Wade became more vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. "Is something wrong?" Vivian asked, noticing his tension. "This is Blackfoot country," Wade explained. "They're usually peaceful these days, but it's wise to be cautious." "Have you had trouble with them before?" Wade shook his head. "Not personally, but stories travel on the trail. There's been tension since the government started restricting their hunting grounds." Vivian frowned. "I thought the Blackfoot were further north." "Mostly, yes, but bands move with the seasons following game." Wade pointed to distant hills. "There's a hunting camp up there, I can see the smoke." Vivian followed his gaze but could discern nothing. "You have good eyes." "Necessary skill out here," Wade said simply. They continued their journey, Wade occasionally adjusting their route to maintain distance from the native encampment. By mid-afternoon, they had entered a narrow valley, the trail winding between steep hillsides covered with pine and scrub oak. "We'll camp early today," Wade announced, pointing to a cleared area ahead. "There's good water, and the valley provides natural protection. Tomorrow's route takes us through more exposed country, so we should rest while we can." They established camp with practiced efficiency, the routine now familiar to all three. The cattle settled quickly, grazing on the valley's rich grass. Wade built a fire while Alina prepared a stew, and Vivian organized their bedrolls and supplies. As dusk fell, the valley filled with long shadows. Wade took his rifle and climbed partway up the eastern slope, scanning the surrounding area one last time before dark. "All clear," he reported when he returned, "but I'll take first watch again tonight. This country makes me uneasy." They ate their supper in relative quiet, each aware of Wade's concerns. When Alina retired to the wagon, Vivian remained by the fire, watching Wade clean his rifle with methodical care. "Do you really expect trouble?" she asked softly. Wade glanced up, his hands never ceasing their work. "I don't expect it, I prepare for it. There's a difference." "And is that how you've lived your life? always preparing for the worst, his hands stilled. "Is there another way out here, Hope?" Vivian suggested. "Faith that good things can happen too." Wade's expression softened. "Like a cowboy riding over the horizon with everything you need." The reference to her own desperate vigilance before his arrival wasn't lost on Vivian. She smiled, acknowledging the parallel. "Exactly like that. And did you find what you needed?" Wade asked, his voice low. Vivian met his gaze steadily. "I'm beginning to think I did." The admission hung in the air between them, neither willing to look away first. Then a log shifted in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks, and the moment passed. "You should rest," Wade said, returning to his rifle. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Vivian nodded, rising to her feet. "Wake me for second watch, I mean it this time." Wade's smile flashed in the firelight. "Yes, madam." True to his word, Wade woke Vivian for the second watch. She sat by the rekindled fire, rifle across her lap, while he settled nearby, ostensibly to sleep. "You don't trust me to keep watch alone," she observed after several minutes of silence. "I trust you," Wade corrected. "I don't trust this valley." Vivian accepted this, understanding his caution wasn't a reflection on her abilities. "Tell me about your home," she said, changing the subject. "Missouri, you said," Wade shifted, getting comfortable. "Small farm near Independence, nothing special." "But it was home," Vivian pressed. "What was it like growing up there?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, then he sighed, relenting. "It was good while my father was alive. We had horses, some cattle, mother grew vegetables and kept chickens. Simple life, but we were happy. And after he died, everything changed," Wade said simply. "Mother remarried quickly, too quickly. Her new husband had different ideas about the farm, about me. We didn't get along." "So you left," Vivian supplied when he fell silent. "So I left," Wade confirmed. "Worked my way west, job to job, cowhand wrangler, sometimes just day labor when nothing else was available. Ended up in Colorado, met Thomas, and you know the rest." "Have you been back to Missouri?" Wade shook his head. "Nothing to go back to. Mother died of fever the year after I left. The farm was sold." "I'm sorry," Vivian said softly. He shrugged. It was a long time ago, but Vivian could hear the lingering pain beneath his casual dismissal. "Still," she persisted. "To lose your home, your family, that leaves a mark." Wade looked at her then, really looked at her, as though seeing something new. "Yes," he said quietly, "it does." The vulnerability in his admission touched her deeply. Vivian reached out impulsively, her hand finding his in the darkness. "We have that in common then," she said. "Both orphans in our way." Wade's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "Yes," he agreed, "though you still have your ranch if we succeed." "The ranch is a place," Vivian said softly. "Without Thomas, it stopped being home." They sat in silence, hands still joined, each lost in their own thoughts. When Wade finally spoke, his voice was hesitant, unlike his usual confident tone. "What will you do after Cheyenne? If we get enough money to save the ranch," Vivian considered the question. "I hadn't thought beyond paying the bank, but running it alone would be." She trailed off, the enormity of the task overwhelming. "Difficult," Wade supplied, "perhaps impossible without help." "Yes," Vivian admitted. "I would need to hire hands at minimum." Wade's thumb moved lightly across her knuckles, an unconscious caress. "Or a partner," he suggested, his voice carefully neutral. Vivian's heart quickened. "A partner," she repeated. "Someone with experience in cattle and ranching. Someone willing to put down roots," Wade added. "To stay in one place." Their eyes met in the firelight, the unspoken question hanging between them. It was too soon, Vivian knew. They had known each other barely 3 days, and yet there was a rightness to it that defied conventional timing. Before she could respond, a sound broke the night's silence, a twig snapping somewhere in the darkness beyond their fire. Wade was instantly alert, his hand leaving hers as he reached for his rifle. "Stay here," he whispered, rising silently to his feet. Vivian gripped her own rifle, scanning the shadows. "What is it?" "Not sure," Wade murmured, his eyes narrowed as he peered into the darkness. "Could be an animal, could be," he never finished. From the darkness came a whooping cry, followed by the thunder of hooves. Riders burst into the firelight, 3 men on painted ponies, their faces streaked with ochre and black. "Blackfoot," Wade said tersely, stepping in front of Vivian. "Stay calm." The riders circled their camp, whooping and brandishing weapons. Vivian saw Alina emerge from the wagon, her face pale with fear. "What do they want?" Vivian asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "To frighten us, most likely," Wade replied. "Or to take some cattle as toll for crossing their hunting grounds." The riders completed their circuit and halted before the fire. The leader, a tall man with a single eagle feather in his hair, dismounted. He spoke in his native tongue, gesturing toward the cattle visible beyond the firelight. Wade shook his head. "I don't understand your words," he said clearly. "But we mean no harm. We're passing through to Cheyenne." The Blackfoot warrior studied Wade, then Vivian, his expression unreadable. He spoke again, pointing to the cattle and holding up 4 fingers. "I think he wants 4 head," Wade translated, "as payment for safe passage. 4. Vivian repeated, "That's 10% of our herd." "I know," Wade said grimly, "but refusing could be dangerous." The Blackfoot leader was growing impatient. He stepped forward, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. "Wait," Vivian said, stepping past Wade despite his attempt to keep her behind him. "We can't give 4 cattle, we need them." She held up 2 fingers, looking directly at the warrior. "2," she said firmly. "We will give 2. The Blackfoot's eyes narrowed. For a tense moment, Vivian thought he might attack. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed a deep, genuine sound of amusement. He spoke to his companions, who also laughed. Turning back to Vivian, the warrior held up 3 fingers, his expression making it clear this was his final offer. Vivian looked at Wade, who gave a slight nod. 3 it is, she agreed, holding up 3 fingers in confirmation. The Blackfoot leader nodded, satisfaction evident in his posture. He said something to his men, and one of them rode toward the cattle. "I'll help him choose," Wade said quickly. "Make sure he takes older animals, not the best stock." He followed the warrior, leaving Vivian and Alina with the Blackfoot leader and the remaining rider. For several tense minutes, no one spoke. Then the leader surprised them by addressing Vivian in broken English. "You brave woman," he said, his accent thick but understandable. "Most white women scream or hide." Vivian straightened her spine. "This is my cattle and my journey, I don't hide." The warrior's eyes gleamed with what might have been respect. "Good. The plains need strong women." Wade returned with the Blackfoot rider, who was now herding 3 cattle away from the main group. The leader mounted his horse, saying something to his men. Before riding off, he looked down at Vivian once more. "Safe journey," he said simply. Then, with a final whoop, the 3 warriors disappeared into the night, taking their tribute with them. Vivian released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Will they return?" Wade shook his head. "I don't think so. They got what they wanted, and they gave their word in their way that we'll have safe passage." "You understand their language?" Vivian was surprised. "Not really," Wade admitted. "But I've dealt with the Plains tribes before. There's a code of honor among them. Once tribute is paid and accepted, they consider their obligation fulfilled." Alina emerged from behind the wagon where she had retreated during the exchange. "That was foolish, Vivian," she scolded. "Bargaining with savages, you could have been killed." "I did what was necessary," Vivian replied calmly. "We couldn't lose 4 head. Wade was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret, admiration mixed with something deeper. "You're something else, Vivian Keller," he said softly. "Thomas chose well when he married you." The compliment warmed her, even as it brought a momentary pang of guilt. Was it disloyal to Thomas's memory to feel this connection to Wade? Or would her husband have approved of the man who had come to their aid? "We should double the watch tonight," Wade said, breaking into her thoughts. "I'll take first, you take second, and Alina can watch from just before dawn." The older woman nodded, clearly relieved to have a role. "I can manage that." They reorganized their camp, moving the wagon closer to the fire for added security. Wade took up position on a rock overlooking the valley, rifle across his knees. Vivian joined him briefly before seeking her bedroll. "Do you really think we're safe now?" she asked. Wade considered the question seriously. As safe as anyone is out here, he finally said. The Blackfoot keep their word, but there are other dangers: wolves, bears, weather. And yet you choose this life, Vivian observed. I chose freedom, Wade corrected. The dangers are just part of the price. Vivian studied his profile, strong and steady against the night sky. And now, when you talk about putting down roots, about partnership, are you willing to give up some of that freedom? Wade turned to face her, his expression serious. For the right reason, he said quietly. For the right person. The weight of his words settled between them, a promise neither was ready to fully articulate. Vivian nodded, understanding. Good night, Wade, she said softly. Good night, Vivian, he replied. Sleep well. But sleep eluded her again, her mind racing with possibilities she had never considered before Wade Yates rode into her life. When he woke her for her watch, she was already alert, waiting for his touch on her shoulder. All quiet, he reported, settling beside her as she had done earlier. No sign of our visitors or any other trouble. Vivian nodded, taking the rifle he offered. You should rest now. Tomorrow's our last day on the trail. Yes, Wade agreed. By this time tomorrow we'll be in Cheyenne. Something in his tone made her look at him sharply. You sound uncertain. Wade sighed. Not uncertain, just aware that things will change once we reach town. Decisions will need to be made. About the future, Vivian supplied. Yes. They sat in silence, the implications of arrival in Cheyenne hanging between them. Finally, Vivian spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I think Thomas would approve of you, she said. Of what you've done for us. Wade's breath caught. I hope so, he said quietly. His good opinion meant a great deal to me. And mine? Vivian asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Wade turned to face her, his eyes serious in the dying firelight. Yours means everything, Vivian. The simple declaration, delivered without artifice or calculation, touched her deeply. Impulsively, she leaned forward and brushed her lips against his cheek, a whisper of contact that nevertheless sent warmth flooding through her. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. Wade remained perfectly still, as though afraid any movement might shatter the moment. You don't need to thank me, he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. Yes, Vivian insisted. I do. You've given me hope again, Wade. That's a precious gift. He turned then, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. For a breathless moment, Vivian thought he might kiss her. Instead, he simply looked at her, his gaze memorizing her features. Get some rest, she said, breaking the spell before it overwhelmed them both. Dawn will be here soon. Wade nodded, withdrawing his hand reluctantly. He moved to his bedroll but remained visible from her position, a reassuring presence in the darkness. The night passed quietly, Alina taking over the watch just before dawn as arranged. By the time the sun cleared the eastern hills, they were already on the move, the cattle heading toward the valley's end and the open country beyond. How far to Cheyenne? Vivian asked as she rode beside Wade at the head of the herd. We should reach the outskirts by nightfall, he replied. Prescott's holding pens are on the north side of town. We'll deliver the cattle there, get our payment, and find rooms for the night. The prospect of civilization, proper beds, hot baths, meals cooked by someone else was appealing after days on the trail. And yet, Vivian felt a curious reluctance as well. Here, in this liminal space between her old life and whatever came next, there was a freedom that would end once they reached town. And tomorrow, she pressed. What happens then? Wade glanced at her, understanding the true question beneath her words. Tomorrow depends on choices we make today, he said carefully. On what you want, Vivian, and what you want, she added. He nodded, acknowledging the point. Yes, what I want matters too. But you have more at stake: the ranch, your future. Our futures could be connected, Vivian said softly, if that's what we both choose. Wade's expression brightened, hope replacing caution. Is that what you're considering, a shared future? Vivian took a deep breath, knowing her answer would change everything between them. Yes, she said simply. I am. The smile that spread across Wade's face was like sunrise breaking over the plains, gradual, then brilliant. "Then I am too," he said quietly. Their eyes held, the promise of possibility stretching between them like an uncharted trail. Then a leaner called from the wagon, breaking the moment. "Riders coming," she warned, pointing to the east. Wade's hand moved instinctively to his rifle, but he relaxed as the distant figures became clearer. "It's all right," he said. "Just cowboys from one of the ranches around here, probably curious about our herd." 3 riders approached at an easy lope, their manner friendly as they drew closer. The leader, a grizzled man with a salt and pepper beard, raised his hand in greeting. "Morning, folks," he called. "Fine-looking cattle you've got there." "Morning," Wade returned, sizing up the newcomers. "They're heading for Prescott's in Cheyenne." The older man nodded approvingly. "Prescott's a fair dealer, you should get good prices." His eyes shifted to Vivian, surprise registering on his weathered face. "Madam," he acknowledged, tipping his hat. "Good morning," Vivian replied, used to the reaction her presence on a cattle drive evoked. "You folks run into any trouble?" The cowboy asked, addressing Wade again. "There's been talk of Blackfoot in the area." "We had a visit last night," Wade admitted. "Peaceful enough, they took 3 head as tribute and left us alone." The older man whistled. "You got off light." "They took 6 from the Bar T drive last week and roughed up one of the hands who objected." "We were fortunate," Vivian said diplomatically. The cowboys rode alongside them for a while, sharing news of conditions ahead and the current prices at Cheyenne's cattle market. When they finally departed, tipping their hats to Vivian and a leaner, Wade seemed more relaxed. "Good to know we're on the right track with Prescott," he commented, "and that the Blackfoot are being relatively reasonable with their tolls." The remainder of the day passed without incident, the terrain gradually flattening as they approached the eastern plains where Cheyenne was situated. By late afternoon, they could see smoke from the town's chimneys on the horizon and the distant outline of buildings. "We'll be there in a couple of hours," Wade announced, satisfaction evident in his voice. "The cattle are in good condition despite the journey. Prescott should be pleased." As they drew closer to town, the first signs of civilization appeared: fenced pastures, outlying farms, then the railroad tracks that had made Cheyenne a boom town in recent years. The cattle became more difficult to manage as they sensed the proximity of other animals and unfamiliar scents. Wade, Vivian, and a leaner worked together seamlessly, keeping the herd moving in the right direction despite distractions. As the sun began to set, they reached Prescott's, holding pens on the town's northern edge, a substantial operation with multiple corrals and a small office building. A man emerged from the office as they approached, waving in recognition. "Yates," he called. "Didn't expect to see you this season." Wade dismounted, shaking the man's hand. "Prescott, good to see you. We've brought 40 head from Wyoming Territory." Prescott, a barrel-chested man with a prosperous look about him, surveyed the cattle with an experienced eye. "Fine-looking stock," he approved. "Grass-fed from the look of them." "From the Keller Ranch," Wade confirmed, gesturing to Vivian. "This is Mrs. Keller, the owner, and Miss Alina Gibson." Prescott's eyebrows rose at the introduction, but he recovered quickly, tipping his hat to the women. "Ladies, welcome to Cheyenne. Don't often see women on a cattle drive. These are unusual circumstances," Vivian explained, dismounting with Wade's assistance. "The ranch is facing foreclosure. We need a fair price for these cattle." Prescott's expression turned serious. "I understand, madam. Let's get your stock settled and then we can discuss terms in my office." The next hour was spent moving the cattle into the holding pens, where they would be fed and watered before inspection and payment. Prescott provided 2 hands to help with the process, allowing Wade, Vivian, and a leaner to finally relax after days of constant vigilance. When the cattle were secured, Prescott led them to his office, a simple structure with a desk, chairs, and a pot-bellied stove that provided welcome warmth against the evening chill. "Now then," he said, settling behind his desk. 37 head, all in good condition." The market's steady right now with demand from Eastern buyers. We started with 40, Wade pointed out. Lost 3 to Blackfoot toll. Prescott nodded understandingly. Common enough these days. Still, 37 is a good delivery. He consulted a ledger, making calculations. I can offer $15 per head, Wade frowned. The going rate is closer to 18 in Laramie. Laramie doesn't have the railroad connection or the buyers I do, Prescott countered. But for an old friend and considering the circumstances, I could go to 16. Vivian stepped forward. Mr. Prescott, we need at least 17 per head to meet our obligations. These are quality animals, well-muscled and healthy despite the journey. Prescott studied her with newfound respect. You know your cattle, Mrs. Keller. I know what they're worth, Vivian replied steadily. The cattle buyer laughed, a genuine sound of appreciation. Very well. $17 per head for all 37. That comes to $629. He opened a cash box, counting out bills and coins. Will that meet your needs? Vivian quickly calculated in her head. The bank required $500. This would cover the debt with enough left over for winter supplies and perhaps a hand or two to help with the ranch. It will, she confirmed. Thank you, Mr. Prescott. The buyer handed the money to Vivian, who carefully stored it in an inner pocket of her coat. My pleasure, Mrs. Keller. Always good to do business with people who know the value of what they're selling. As they left Prescott's office, night had fallen completely. The town of Cheyenne spread before them, its main street illuminated by gas lamps and the lights from saloons and hotels. We should find rooms for the night, Wade suggested. There's a decent hotel on 2nd Street that caters to families. Alina nodded gratefully. A real bed sounds like heaven after nights in that wagon. They led their horses and the wagon through the bustling streets, attracting curious glances from townspeople unaccustomed to seeing 2 women in trail-worn clothes. The hotel Wade had mentioned, the Laramie House, proved to be a respectable establishment with clean rooms, and a dining room that was still serving supper. The clerk raised eyebrows at their trail-dusty appearance, but became more accommodating when Wade placed gold coins on the counter. 2 rooms, he requested. 1 for the ladies, 1 for myself. And baths, Vivian added. Hot baths, if possible, the clerk nodded. Certainly, madam, I'll have water brought up immediately. Once in their room, Vivian and Alina sank onto the beds with identical sighs of relief. The room was simple but clean, with 2 narrow beds, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. We did it, Vivian said wonderingly. We actually did it, Alina. The older woman smiled tiredly. We did. Or rather, you and that cowboy of yours did. I was just along for the ride. Vivian glanced sharply at her. He's not my cowboy. Not yet, perhaps, Alina replied, her eyes knowing. But I've seen how you look at each other. And I've seen how he watches over you. Before Vivian could respond, a knock at the door announced the arrival of bath water. For the next hour, the women luxuriated in the simple pleasure of hot water and soap, washing away days of trail dust and fatigue. Clean and dressed in the one change of clothes they had brought, they met Wade in the hotel's dining room. He too had bathed and changed, his hair still damp, his face freshly shaved. The transformation was striking. Without trail dust and stubble, he looked younger, his features more refined. Ladies, he greeted them, rising from the table he had secured. You look refreshed. As do you, Vivian replied, suddenly shy in this new setting. On the trail, their growing connection had seemed natural, inevitable. Here, in civilization, old rules and expectations reasserted themselves. They ordered supper real food, not trail rations, and ate with appreciation. The dining room was half full, mostly with traveling businessmen and a few local families. Their conversation was subdued, practical matters dominating as they discussed returning to the ranch. We can buy supplies tomorrow, Wade suggested. Load the wagon and be on our way by mid-morning. I'll need to wire the bank, Vivian added. Let them know the payment is coming. Alina excused herself after the meal, fatigue evident in her face. Don't stay up too late, she advised Vivian. We have a long journey home. Left alone, Vivian and Wade fell into an awkward silence, the ease of their trail conversations suddenly elusive. Around them, the dining room gradually emptied as guests retired for the night. "Would you like to walk?" Wade finally suggested. "The night air might be welcome after being indoors." Vivian nodded, grateful for the suggestion. "Yes, I would." They left the hotel, strolling down the boardwalk that lined Cheyenne's Main Street. The night was clear, stars visible despite the town's lights. Music drifted from saloons, along with bursts of laughter and conversation. "It feels strange," Vivian confessed. "Being back in civilization after days on the trail," Wade nodded, understanding. "The transition is always jarring, too many people, too much noise." "Yet you keep returning to towns," Vivian observed, "between your journeys." "Necessity more than preference," Wade admitted. "Supplies, information, occasional work when funds are low." They walked in silence for a few moments, their steps naturally falling into rhythm. Then Wade spoke, his voice carefully neutral. "We need to discuss what happens next, Vivian." She nodded, knowing this conversation couldn't be avoided. "Yes, we do." Wade led her to a small park at the end of the street, where a bench offered privacy from passers-by. They sat, maintaining a proper distance between them despite the intimacy they had shared on the trail. "You have options now," Wade began. "With the bank paid, you could sell the ranch, move back to a city, Denver perhaps, where you have connections." "I could," Vivian agreed, "but that's not what I want." Wade's expression brightened slightly. No, Vivian confirmed. "The ranch is my home now, despite everything. I want to make it work." "But you said yourself it's too much for one person to manage alone." Vivian turned to face him directly. "Which is why I'm considering your suggestion of a partnership." Wade's breath caught. "You're serious?" "Completely," Vivian said steadily. "You know cattle, you know the land, you've proven yourself capable and trustworthy, and there's a connection between us. I think you feel it too." "I do," Wade admitted, his voice low. "Since the moment I saw you standing on that porch with a shotgun, I've felt it." Vivian smiled at the memory. "Not the most romantic first meeting, but honest," Wade said, "like everything between us has been." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle yet firm. "I need to be honest about something else, Vivian. If we do this, if we become partners in the ranch, I would want more eventually, not just a business arrangement." Vivian felt warmth spread through her at his words. "I know," she said softly, "and I think I would want that too, in time." Wade's eyes searched hers, looking for certainty. "It's soon," he acknowledged. "After Thomas, I understand if you need time." "I do need time," Vivian agreed, "but not as much as I thought. Thomas has been gone nearly a month, but in truth, I began losing him months before that, as the ranch failed and he withdrew into himself." She squeezed Wade's hand. "What I feel for you is unexpected but real, and I hope it could grow into something lasting." Wade brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I would do everything in my power to make it so," he promised. "To make the ranch succeed, to make you happy." "Then we have an agreement," Vivian said, smiling through sudden tears. "Partners." "Partners," Wade confirmed, his own smile brightening the night. "In all things, in time." They returned to the hotel, walking closer now, their hands occasionally brushing. At the door to her room, Vivian hesitated. "We'll leave for home tomorrow?" she asked. Wade nodded. "Home," he repeated, as though testing the word. "Yes, tomorrow we head home." Vivian impulsively rose on tiptoe and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Wade." His smile warmed her to her core. "Good night, Vivian. Sleep well." Morning brought a flurry of activity. After breakfast, they divided tasks efficiently. Wade tending to the horses and wagon, Alina purchasing food supplies, and Vivian visiting the bank to wire funds to Blackstone Bank. They reconvened at midday, the wagon loaded and ready for the journey back to Wyoming territory. "Everything's settled," Vivian reported, tucking the bank receipt safely away. "Mr. Higgins will have the money by the time we return, and he's agreed to extend the note for another year at a reasonable rate." "Good news," Wade approved. And I've plotted a route that should get us home faster than we came. No cattle to slow us down this time. Home. The word resonated between them, a promise of shared purpose and future possibilities. They left Cheyenne behind, the wagon rolling steadily westward. The journey back was indeed faster and considerably less eventful. They encountered no Blackfoot raiding parties, no storms severe enough to halt their progress. By the fourth day, they were approaching familiar territory. "We should reach the ranch by nightfall," Wade announced as they broke camp that morning. Vivian felt a curious mixture of emotions: anticipation at returning to her home, apprehension about the challenges that still lay ahead, and an undeniable joy in the knowledge that she wouldn't be facing those challenges alone. As the sun began its westward descent, the familiar contours of the ranch appeared on the horizon. The house stood just as they had left it, the barn's roof still in need of repair, the corral empty without the cattle they had driven to market. Yet something had changed. Or rather, someone had changed Vivian herself. The woman who rode back to the ranch was not the desperate widow who had watched the horizon for salvation. She had found strength she didn't know she possessed, courage to face uncertainty, and hope for a future she couldn't have imagined a week earlier. They pulled the wagon into the yard just as dusk was falling. Eleanor immediately headed for the house, eager to check that all was as they had left it. Wade helped Vivian down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist. "Welcome home," he said softly. Vivian looked up at him, at the man who had ridden over her horizon carrying everything she needed: skills, strength, and the promise of companionship. "Welcome home to you too," she replied. His smile was answer enough, a pledge of days to come and a future they would build together. As they walked toward the house, shoulders touching, the last light of day gilded the landscape in gold, as rich with promise as the new beginning that awaited them. 2 years later, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard as Vivian stood on the porch, watching riders approach from the north pasture. She recognized Wade's tall figure immediately, his posture in the saddle as familiar to her now as her own reflection. Beside him rode Jeremy, the young hand they'd hired last spring, leading a string of newly broken horses. The animals moved with the fluid grace of well-trained mounts, a testament to Wade's skill as a horseman. Vivian smiled, pride warming her chest. In 2 years, they had transformed the struggling Keller ranch into a thriving operation. The cattle herd had been rebuilt, now numbering over 100 head. They'd added horses as well, with Wade's expertise allowing them to breed and train quality mounts that brought premium prices from the army and neighboring ranches. "They're back," Eleanor called from inside the house. "And just in time, supper's nearly ready." "I see them," Vivian confirmed, her hand automatically going to her rounded belly. At 6 months with child, she had reluctantly given up riding for the duration, though she still oversaw the ranch's finances and daily operations. Wade dismounted with easy grace, giving instructions to Jeremy before turning toward the house. His face lit with a smile when he saw Vivian waiting, the same smile that had captivated her from the earliest days of their acquaintance. "How are my 2 favorite people?" he asked, climbing the porch steps and placing a gentle hand on her belly. "We're well," Vivian assured him, leaning up for his kiss. "Your son has been practicing his riding skills today. Lots of kicking," Wade laughed. "Or daughter," he reminded her, "equal chance of either." "Either way, this child will ride before walking, I'm certain," Vivian said wryly. "Between your influence and mine." They had married 6 months after returning from Cheyenne, a simple ceremony in the town church with Eleanor and a few neighboring ranchers as witnesses. The transition from partnership to marriage had been seamless, their shared work providing a solid foundation for deeper intimacy. The first year had been challenging, rebuilding the herd, repairing the buildings, establishing routines. But they had faced each obstacle together, their complementary skills making them a formidable team. Wade's knowledge of cattle and horses, paired perfectly with Vivian's head for business and innate practicality. Now, with a child on the way and the ranch thriving, Vivian could look back on that desperate moment 2 years ago with a sense of wonder. How close she had come to losing everything, not just the ranch, but the possibility of the life she now led. "The horses look good," she commented as Wade washed up for supper. "Jeremy's learning well." Wade nodded, drying his hands. "He has a natural touch with them, reminds me a bit of myself at that age." "Speaking of young people," Vivian said, "Sarah Jenkins rode over this morning. She asked if Jeremy might escort her to the harvest dance next month." Wade's eyebrows rose. "Did she now? And what did our shy stable hand have to say about that?" "He doesn't know yet," Vivian admitted. "I thought you might enjoy delivering that particular message." Wade laughed, the sound still one of Vivian's greatest delights. "You're a matchmaker now, Mrs. Yates, just creating opportunities," Vivian defended herself with a smile. "The way opportunities were created for us." Wade's expression softened. He drew her into his arms, one hand cradling her belly where their child grew. "That wasn't opportunity," he said quietly. "That was fate." Vivian leaned into his embrace, savoring the strength and tenderness she found there. "Fate, then," she agreed, "though we made our own choices too." "The best choices," Wade murmured against her hair. "Every day, I thank whatever forces brought me to that horizon just when you were watching for hope." Vivian looked up at him, this man who had become the center of her world, partner, husband, father of her child. "You were everything I needed," she said softly. "Everything I still need." His kiss was gentle yet full of promise of the night to come, of years stretching ahead, of a future built on love and shared purpose. Outside, the sun dipped below the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. Inside, surrounded by the home they had created together, Vivian and Wade stood in each other's arms, the journey that had brought them together complete, the journey that would carry them forward just beginning. And on the horizon, where once there had been only desperate hope, the future beckoned bright, certain, and theirs to share.